From the moment Mark walked into the office, I knew something was about to change. I'm Anna, by the way. Just your average woman married to David for what feels like a lifetime, working a 9-to-5 job. But that day, when Mark, the new guy, stepped in, there was this electric charge in the air. Mark was charming, the kind of charming that made you forget your own name. He had this easy smile and a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. And when he talked to me, it wasn't just casual office chat. There was something more, something like a spark. We started these little flirtations. A lingering look here, a half-whispered joke there. It was harmless, I told myself. Just a bit of fun. David, my husband, he was always so busy with his own work, and we'd fallen into this routine that was so predictable, so mundane. One Tuesday, Mark suggested we grab lunch together, just the two of us. It was supposed to be a quick bite at the cafe down the street from our office, but it turned into this long, drawn-out meal where we talked about everything and nothing. I laughed more in that hour than I had in months. The attraction to Mark was undeniable. I'd catch myself thinking about him at the oddest moments, while making dinner during meetings, even when David and I were watching TV. I knew it was wrong, but it felt like a fire had been lit inside me, and I didn't know how to put it out. David never suspected a thing. I became an expert at lying, telling him I had to work late when really I was sneaking out to meet Mark. It was thrilling in a way, sneaking around, the secrecy of it all. Each lie I told David, each secret meeting with Mark, it was like I was stepping further away from my old life, my old self. And that's how it began. A series of choices that seemed so insignificant at the time, but would later unravel everything I thought I knew about life, love, and loyalty. The day I crossed the line with Mark, my whole world turned upside down. I'm Anna, and let me tell you, there's nothing quite like the thrill mixed with the terror of doing something you know you shouldn't. It was a Wednesday, the kind of day you'd never expect life-changing events to happen. But there we were, Mark and I, in his apartment, crossing boundaries I'd never thought I'd cross. It happened so fast. One minute we were laughing over a shared joke, and the next, we were entangled in each other's arms, lost in a passion I'd forgotten existed. The guilt was there, nagging at the back of my mind, but it was drowned out by the sheer excitement of the moment. It was wrong, but it felt so right. After that day, everything changed. I found myself pulling away from David, my husband. Our conversations became short, our interactions routine and devoid of any real connection. I was living a double life, and with each passing day, the distance between David and I grew wider and wider. Mark and I, we were like two people caught in a whirlwind. We started planning a romantic getaway, a weekend at a cozy little cabin in the world. We talked about it in hushed tones, our plans laced with excitement and secrecy. But in the office, whispers started. I could feel the eyes on me, the questioning glances. Our colleagues, they weren't fools. They noticed the long lunches, the shared smiles, the way we seemed to always find reasons to be near each other. The air was thick with suspicion, and I knew it was only a matter of time before rumors started swirling. It was a game of cat and mouse, each day a dance of keeping our secret while the walls of our deception seemed to close in on us. We were playing with fire, and deep down, I knew that eventually, we were going to get burned. All right, Anna, focus, I muttered to myself as I packed my bag for the weekend. This wasn't just any weekend, it was the weekend, the romantic getaway with Mark. The thrill of anticipation was almost tangible, like electricity in the air. We drove off to this secluded cabin nestled in the heart of the woods, the kind of place where you could scream and no one would hear you. Not that we were planning on screaming, but you get the picture. Mark was all charm and smiles, his hand finding mine as we drove further away from the life I knew. That cabin, oh, it was something out of a storybook. Cozy, intimate, and miles away from civilization. As the weekend unfolded, something inside me shifted. It was no longer just a fling with Mark, I was falling for him, hard. The way he looked at me, the way he made me feel alive, it was intoxicating. But reality has a way of crashing down on you, and mine came in the form of a confrontation with my closest friend, Jenna. She'd figured it out somehow. Jenna, with her no-nonsense attitude, cornered me as soon as I was back. "Anna, what the hell are you doing?" she demanded, her eyes burning holes into mine. "Everyone knows, Anna, you're not being as slick as you think." I was taken aback, my heart racing. "I don't know what you're talking about, Jenna." I lied, trying to sound convincing. But who was I kidding? Jenna knew me better than that. "Don't insult my intelligence," she snapped. "You and Mark, it's obvious. You're risking everything, Anna. Your marriage, your job." Her words stung, but I was too deep in to admit anything, even to myself. "You're imagining things," I said with a forced laugh. "Mark and I are just friends, you know how it is at work." But Jenna wasn't buying it. "Friends don't look at each other like that. Friends don't disappear on secret weekends together." "I thought you were smarter than this, Anna." I felt cornered, trapped. So, I did what I'd become so good at. I denied everything. "You're wrong, Jenna. There's nothing going on." My voice was firm, but inside I was crumbling. Jenna shook her head, clearly not convinced. "Fine, live in your fantasy world. But remember, lies have a way of catching up to you. And when they do, don't expect me to be there to pick up the pieces." With that, she left, leaving me alone with my tangled web of lies and justifications. I knew deep down that Jenna was right, but I wasn't ready to face that truth. Not yet. "Life's a gamble," I used to tell myself, but little did I know how much I'd be betting on this forbidden game. I'm Anna, and I was about to spin the wheel of fortune, or more like misfortune, with Mark. It started with a gift, a dangerously thoughtful one. Mark handed me a small, elegantly wrapped box. My hands trembled as I unwrapped it, revealing a stunning, expensive necklace. It was beautiful, far too lavish for a mere friend. "Mark, I can't accept this," I whispered. But my voice was weak, betraying my words. "Nonsense," he replied with that devil-may-care smile. "I saw it and thought of you." His touch as he helped me put it on sent shivers down my spine. That necklace wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a symbol, a tether that pulled me further away from my reality. Meanwhile, my husband David, he wasn't blind. He'd started to pick up on the subtle changes. The late nights, my distracted demeanor, the unexplained expenses. I could see the suspicion in his eyes, the unasked questions. He'd find excuses to check in on me, his voice laced with a concern that was more about seeking truth than my well-being. One day, Mark and I threw caution to the wind. We met up in a busy downtown cafe, a public setting where anyone could see us. The thrill was exhilarating, we laughed and chatted like we didn't have a care in the world, but the danger of being seen added an edge to our rendezvous. As we sat there, lost in our bubble, I noticed a couple from work across the street. My heart stopped. Had they seen us? I glanced at Mark, signaling with my eyes. We quickly paid the bill and left separately, but the fear of being caught lingered like a bad aftertaste. I returned home that evening to find David sitting in the living room, an unreadable expression on his face. "We need to talk," he said, his voice steady but his eyes betraying a storm of emotions. "Anna, we need to talk." That's how it began, the confrontation that would change everything. David's voice was calm, but his eyes, they were like storm clouds, dark and brooding. I braced myself, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. "About what?" I asked, trying to sound nonchalant, but inside, I was a mess. The walls of the life I had built were closing in on me. David took a deep breath. "I know something's going on, Anna. You can't hide it from me." "Who is he?" His words cut through the air like a knife. I was cornered, but I wasn't ready to give in. "You're being ridiculous," I snapped, my voice a blend of fear and defiance. "There's no one else." David wasn't convinced. He pressed on, his suspicions laid bare, but I stood my ground. deny, deny, deny. That was my mantra. The truth was too dangerous, too damaging. Later that night, as David lay asleep, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The confrontation had shaken me. It was clear I couldn't keep juggling my double life much longer. It was time to make a choice. The next day I met Mark, my heart heavy with a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. I'm going to leave, David. I blurted out, the words tumbling out in a rush. Mark's eyes lit up. Really? He asked, his hand reaching for mine. Anna, we can have a future together, a real future. Just you and me. His words were what I wanted to hear, a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. The promise of a new life, a fresh start, it was intoxicating. I wanted to believe him, to believe in us. So I started planning, plotting my exit from the life I'd known. I was stepping into the unknown, but Mark's promises were like a beacon, guiding me forward. It was a risky move, a leap into the void, but I was past the point of no return. I never imagined I'd be that person, you know, the one who pours out their heart to a coworker in a moment of desperation. But there I was, sitting across from Lisa, a colleague I'd come to trust, spilling the beans about my plans to leave David for Mark. Lisa's eyes were wide with shock. Are you sure about this, Anna? She asked, her voice tinged with concern. I could tell she was trying to be supportive, but her disbelief was as clear as day. Yeah, I'm sure, I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Mark and I, we have something special, it's worth the risk. But even as I said it, a tiny voice in my head whispered doubts. Later that week, those doubts grew louder. I was at work, doing my best to act normal when I heard it. Mark's voice, flirting with a younger colleague. The same charming lines he used on me, now being dished out to someone else. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I hid behind a file cabinet, eavesdropping, my heart sinking with every word I heard. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. Mark loved me. He'd said so himself. He was planning a future with me, not her. But there it was. The undeniable truth, playing out right in front of me. I felt a rush of emotions. Anger, betrayal, hurt. But I pushed them down. I couldn't afford to fall apart. Not now. I had to be strong, to stick to the plan. So I did what I'd become so good at. I denied the doubts, silenced the voice in my head that screamed at me to see the truth. Mark loved me, I told myself. This was just a harmless flirtation, nothing more. I clung to that belief, desperate to believe that everything was going to work out. That Mark and I were meant to be. I had to. Because the alternative, facing the reality of what I was doing, was too painful to bear. David, we need to talk. That's how I started the conversation that would end my marriage. My voice was steady, but inside, I was a mess. I'm Anna, and I was about to turn my life upside down. David looked up from his book, his eyes meeting mine. What's wrong, Anna? He asked, concerned, etching his features. I took a deep breath, the words feeling like lead on my tongue. I want a divorce. I blurted out, the finality of the statement hanging in the air like a dark cloud. For a moment, David just stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then the storm broke. Why, Anna? Why are you doing this? His voice was a mix of confusion, pain, and disbelief. I had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in my head. But now, faced with David's heartbreak, my rehearsed lines felt hollow. I'm not happy, David. I haven't been happy for a long time, I said, avoiding his gaze. David's face crumpled, his heartbreak palpable. Is there someone else? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't bring myself to admit the truth, to add more pain to his already broken heart. No, it's not about someone else. It's about me needing a change. I lied. We talked, or rather, I talked, and David listened. He was heartbroken, but in the end, he agreed to the divorce. There was no yelling, no fighting. Just a quiet, devastating acceptance. The following weeks were a blur. I found an apartment and started packing up my life piece by piece. Each item I packed felt like a piece of my past being sealed away. The day I moved out was surreal. David helped me load my boxes into the car, the silence between us louder than any words we could have spoken. When it was time to leave, I looked back at the home we'd built together. David standing in the doorway. My heart ached. I drove away, leaving behind the life I had known, stepping into a new, uncertain future. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but there was no turning back now. Starting a new life with Mark felt like stepping into a dream, but even dreams have their dark corners. I'm Anna, and I was about to learn that some dreams can quickly turn into nightmares. The first weeks with Mark were like a honeymoon phase. We were wrapped up in our own little world, blissfully ignorant of the storm that was brewing on the horizon. Every morning, waking up next to him felt like a new adventure, a chance to explore this thrilling new chapter of my life. We spent our days exploring the city, trying out new restaurants, and enjoying each other's company. The nights were even better, filled with passion and whispers of love and promises for the future. It was everything I'd hoped for, everything I thought I wanted. But as the weeks passed, the initial euphoria started to fade, giving way to the reality of our situation. The things about Mark that I'd once found charming began to grate on me. His casual attitude towards money, his tendency to prioritize his needs over mine, the way he dismissed my concerns with the waves of his hand. Tensions started to build, slowly at first, then all at once. We began to argue over little things: who forgot to buy groceries, who left the bathroom light on, why we were spending yet another night in front of the TV. The arguments were petty, but they revealed the cracks in the foundation of our relationship. I started to feel a strain, a tension that I couldn't shake off. The reality of living with Mark, away from the safety and stability of my old life, was beginning to sink in. It wasn't just a fun fling anymore, it was real life, and it was far more complicated than I had anticipated. The blissful bubble we had been living in started to burst, revealing the harsh truth that maybe, just maybe, I had made a mistake. But I wasn't ready to admit that, not even to myself. So, I pushed through, hoping that things would get better. That the dream wouldn't turn into a nightmare. "You're making a mistake, Anna," my friend Jenna had warned me. Her words echoing in my head as I sat alone in the apartment I shared with Mark. I had ignored her, ignored all of them. They didn't understand, I told myself. They didn't see the Mark I knew. The Mark who had promised me the world. But as I sat there, staring at the empty chair across from me, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe they were right. Mark had been coming home late, his excuses flimsy at best. Work, he'd say, or a drink with a friend. But his words rang hollow. I wanted to believe him, to trust that the life we were building together was as solid as he'd promised. But the late nights became more frequent, and with them, a gnawing sense of doubt crept into my mind. Then one night, the truth came crashing down on me like a ton of bricks. I'd called his office for something trivial, only to be told he'd left hours ago. Confused and worried, I called his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. That's when I decided to drive by the bar he said he'd be at. There he was, but not alone. He was with her, a younger woman, laughing and touching in a way that left no room for doubt. My heart shattered into a million pieces right there in the parking lot. I wanted to storm in, to confront him, but my body wouldn't move. I was frozen, the painful realization of his infidelity cutting through me like a knife. I drove back home in a daze, each mile a reminder of the lies, the betrayal. I walked into our apartment, a place that had once felt like a haven, now a prison of broken promises. The walls seemed to close in on me, each picture, each piece of furniture, a reminder of the life I had gambled away. I spent the night awake, every moment with Mark replaying in my mind, each memory now tainted with the stain of his betrayal. I had ignored my friends, ignored the signs, blinded by love or maybe just the illusion of it. As the sun rose, so did a new realization within me. I had been living a lie, a fantasy built on the fragile foundation of Mark's promises. The truth was harsh, unyielding, and in its light, I could no longer ignore the reality of what my life had become. The moment I confronted Mark, it was like facing a stranger. His once warm eyes were cold, distant, as if I was nothing more than an inconvenience. "Anna, this isn't what it looks like," he started, but the lies tasted bitter in my mouth. "Don't insult me, Mark," I snapped, my voice a cocktail of anger and pain. "I saw you with her. How long has this been going on?" Mark's facade of innocence crumbled, replaced by a chilling indifference. "It's not serious, Anna. You're overreacting," he said, but his words were empty, devoid of the love he once professed. "How can you say that?" I demanded, my heart racing with a mix of betrayal and disbelief. "You made promises, Mark. You said we had a future together." Mark's response was a shrug, a heartless gesture that cut deeper than any words. "Things change, Anna. I didn't plan for this to happen." I felt a surge of fury, but it quickly dissolved into despair. The man I had sacrificed everything for was standing in front of me, unapologetic, unmoved by the pain he had caused. It was a brutal awakening, a realization that the life I had built with Mark was nothing but a house of cards. The final blow came swiftly. "I'm leaving, Anna," Mark said, his words final, irrevocable. "I need something different." I watched, numb and broken, as he packed his things and walked out the door, leaving me alone in the void he had created. The silence that followed was deafening, a stark reminder of the magnitude of my mistakes. As I sat there, the weight of my decisions crashing down on me, regret consumed me. I thought about David, the life we had shared, the promises I had broken. I had traded a diamond for a stone, blinded by the illusion of a love that never truly existed. The night crept in, and with it, a profound sense of loss. I was alone, truly alone, left to grapple with the consequences of my actions. The realization was crushing, a heavy burden of guilt and remorse that I knew I would carry with me for the rest of my life. The day I tried to reconcile with David was the day I truly understood the cost of my choices. There I was, standing outside the door of the man I had once called my husband, my heart pounding in my chest, rehearsing the words I'd been turning over in my mind for days. "David, I made a mistake," I began the moment he opened the door. His expression was guarded, a stark contrast to the warm smiles I used to be greeted with. "I was wrong, and I'm so sorry. Can we try again?" David looked at me, not with anger, but with a resignation that was somehow worse. "Anna, it's too late," he said, his voice steady but devoid of warmth. "I've moved on, I can't go back to what we had." His words hit me like a physical blow. I had hoped, oh foolishly, that he would be waiting for me, that we could pick up the pieces of our broken life. But there he was, standing before me, a clear message in his eyes. He had closed that chapter of his life. I stumbled away from David's house, the finality of his rejection echoing in my ears. It was over, there was no going back, the realization was a bitter pill to swallow. In the days that followed, I reached out to friends, seeking solace, understanding, maybe even forgiveness. But one by one, I found doors closing on me. Phone calls went unanswered, messages unreturned. The friends I had once laughed with, shared secrets with, were now just ghosts of a life I had carelessly thrown away. The isolation was suffocating. Everywhere I turned, I was met with reminders of the life I had lost, the relationships I had destroyed. The vibrant social life I once took for granted was now a barren wasteland, a stark testament to the consequences of my actions. As I lay in bed each night, staring at the ceiling, the silence was overwhelming. The loneliness was a constant companion, a reminder of the choices I had made and the price I was now paying. I had gambled with my happiness and lost everything. The silence of my apartment was deafening, each ticking second a reminder of the loneliness that had become my constant companion. "I'm Anna," and I was learning the hard way that some choices leave you in a freefall with no safety net. The loneliness wasn't just a feeling, it was a presence, enveloping me, reminding me of the void left by my shattered life. At work, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. The colleagues who once greeted me with warm smiles now offered nothing but cold shoulders and judgmental glances. I could feel their respect slipping away like sand through my fingers. Whispers followed me as I walked through the office, each word a stinging slap of reality. Financial struggles added to the mounting pressure. Without David's support, every bill, every rent payment, became a mountain to climb. I scrimped and saved, but it was like bailing out a sinking ship with a teaspoon. The life of comfort and security I had taken for granted with David now seemed like a distant dream. The culmination of loneliness, loss of respect at work, and financial woes led to an emotional breakdown that hit me like a tidal wave. One evening after a particularly grueling day, I collapsed on the kitchen floor, tears streaming down my face, sobs racking my body. The walls of my apartment felt like they were closing in, suffocating me with the weight of my choices. I cried for what felt like hours, mourning the loss of my marriage, my friends, my dignity, and the life I had so recklessly thrown away. The realization of what I had lost, what I had done, was overwhelming. I was alone, truly alone, and the pain of that was more intense than anything I had ever experienced. The emotional breakdown was a wake-up call, a stark realization that I had hit rock bottom. But even in that dark moment, a part of me knew that this was just the beginning of a long, hard journey of facing the consequences of my actions. The first step to fixing a problem is admitting you have one, right? That's what led me, Anna, to the therapist's office, a place I never thought I'd be. The walls were lined with books, and the air had this calming scent that did little to ease the turmoil inside me. Sitting there, I felt like a cliché, the fallen woman seeking redemption. Therapy wasn't easy. It meant peeling back layers of denial, confronting the guilt and pain that I buried under a mountain of lies and excuses. The therapist, Dr. Ellis, was a kind woman with a gentle voice, but her questions were like daggers, cutting to the heart of my pain. Anna, why did you make those choices? She'd ask, her eyes searching mine for truths I was afraid to admit. I'd fumble for answers, but in that room, there was nowhere to hide. I had to face the reality of what I had done, the lives I had upended, including my own. Contact with David was minimal and strictly formal. A few necessary exchanges about finalizing the divorce, nothing more. His voice was polite, distant. The warmth we once shared had cooled into a professional civility that was more painful than outright hostility. Then came the day I learned about David's new relationship. It was through a mutual friend, a casual comment and conversation that felt like a punch to the gut. David seems happy, she said. He's seeing someone new. Those words echoed in my head long after the conversation ended. David, my David, had moved on. He was happy without me. The realization was a bitter pill to swallow. Part of me was glad for him, but another part, a darker, more selfish part, felt a pang of jealousy, a sense of loss that went beyond the end of our marriage. Therapy sessions became my lifeline, the one place where I could unravel the tangled mess of my emotions. Dr. Ellis helped me navigate through the murky waters of regret and self-forgiveness. It was a slow, often painful process, but with each session I felt a little more of the weight lifting off my shoulders. I was learning to accept the consequences of my actions, to understand that healing was a journey, not a destination. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but for the first time in a long time I felt a flicker of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to make things right. The morning sun broke through the curtains, casting a golden glow across the room. It was a new day, a symbol of the new life I was trying to build. I'm Anna, and I was standing at the crossroads of my life, fully aware of the consequences of my actions. As I brewed my coffee, the silence of the apartment was a stark reminder of the solitude that was now my constant companion. Gone were the days of waking up to David's smile or the excitement of sneaking off to see Mark. What I had now was a chance to start over, to rebuild from the ashes of the life I'd burned down. The job was my first step towards this new beginning. I returned to the office, determined to face the whispers and sideways glances. It wasn't easy, the air was thick with unspoken judgments, but I held my head high, focusing on my work, proving to my colleagues and to myself that I was more than my mistakes. Finding a new place to live was another challenge. Budget constraints meant downsizing, trading the comforts I was used to for a modest one-bedroom apartment. Each box I unpacked was a mix of nostalgia and a painful reminder of what I had lost. But it was also a step towards independence, towards creating a space that was mine, and mine alone. Therapy continued to be a refuge, a place to untangle the complex emotions that swirled inside me. Dr. Ellis guided me through the process, helping me to understand the why behind my actions, to learn from them, and most importantly, to forgive myself. It was a slow process, each session peeling back another layer of pain and regret. I also started to reach out to mend bridges I had burned. I called old friends, sent emails, apologizing, explaining, and asking for forgiveness. The responses were mixed. Some doors remained closed, but others opened tentatively, giving me a glimpse of hope. Physical exercise became an outlet for the pent-up emotions. I started jogging every morning, feeling the burn in my lungs, the pounding of my heart, a physical manifestation of my inner turmoil. With each stride, I felt a little of the weight lifting, a sense of clarity emerging from the fog of my past decisions. Slowly, I was taking steps towards healing, towards a new version of myself. It was not the life I had imagined, but it was a life I was determined to make the best of. The journey was just beginning, and I knew there would be more obstacles ahead. But for the first time in a long while, I felt ready to. A person who would kill your love when that love was all you had was not a good person, according to Jacob Morrissey. Even worse, if that person was your wife, the person who was supposed to love you more than anyone else. The person who knew you better than anyone else. The person who saw you at your most vulnerable moments. The man who found his way into your heart, into your bones, into your blood, into your soul. 3. Abuno, how much all-consuming love and cancer have in common. Jacob concluded that some kinds of love, like cancer, are benign. Others are malignant. His wife fell into the malignant category, and like cancer, it needed to be cut out and destroyed. And Jacob knew how to do it. It was so perfect that he was sure even she would appreciate the way it was destroyed, and such a great ending. Jacob looked behind the workbench out the window, at the garden outside the window. It was filled with color. The garden of her English cottage, the very one she had spent so much time creating and planting, the one she loved so much, her pride and joy. But she'd abandoned it, too. For her, it would be like coming home. Yes, Jacob decided, it was poetic. Jacob stared at the blank canvas with the brush in his hand for a long time, waiting for it. It was hard to describe. It was an urge, a longing, a tingling in his fingertips, a flutter in his stomach, a longing in his soul, and a need in his gut. It was a clear vision in his mind that guided his hand. Without it, there was no art. Jacob slowly made the 360 turn, looking around the 4 walls of his studio, each stacked with blank canvases. They leaned casually over him, like regulars sitting with glasses of wine in their hands at a premiere. But unlike the careless collectors, they were pinned with preparatory sketches, each one accusing him, urging him to begin. What, he shouted to them, I'm waiting for it, and so are you. If you want to attack someone, attack it. Jacob frowned and threw the brush. It rolled across the floor, stopping just short of one of the censored canvases. He threw the palette to the floor in anger. It fell face down on the floor with a crash. Still unsettled, he kicked it, enjoying the colorful stain it left on the wooden floor. It was the most creative thing he'd accomplished in months. Then Jacob did what he'd done every day since it left him. He went for a walk. He walked down a long, familiar, tree-lined path. The maples were green with new spring growth. Below them, all the way to the gate in the distance, a river of yellow, white, and green flowers flowed, daffodils. Jacob's feet were in the present, continuing his journey, his mind lagging behind the past. Hi, please, Jake, let's do it. Daffodils are such happy flowers, it'll make the house perfect. Jake hid a smile. Perfect was Grace's favorite word. The driveway is so long, it would take thousands. True, but they'll multiply, and every year they'll look better and better. They'll multiply with our happiness. Of course, he said yes. He always said yes to her. Jacob frowned, looking at the abundance of daffodils. She lied. She'd said they were happy flowers, and he wasn't happy. Dinner consisted of a can of cold baked beans, which he ate sitting on the floor of his studio. Dessert was a handful of dried apples that had become tough from age and exposure to the air. Their leathery texture gave Jacob's jaw a good workout. He thought longingly of the tender, juicy roast Grace had prepared. Jacob threw his head back and sniffed, imagining he could smell his favorite meat roasting in the huge double oven, pork with homemade applesauce. Babe, you've gotta cut it out. Dinner's on the table, Grace whispered into his ear. Jacob flinched, turned his head, and looked back. There was no one there, and certainly not Grace. She'd left months ago. Now, Shelby was getting a roast from Grace that was to die for. Shelby, who the hell is a guy with a name like Shelby? Jacob asked from the empty room. Miserable, effeminate, born with a silver spoon in his mouth, an art collector with more money than brains, that's who. Jacob snorted, remembering how he'd described the effeminate man who'd stolen his wife. A man of fast cars and even faster women. A banal, bored, jaded millionaire. Ironically, she met Shelby at Jake's last solo show. The bastard had even bought one of Jake's canvases to impress her. He must have really wanted to get into her panties, and he'd shelled out $45,000 for the privilege. Jake froze in place. He couldn't believe what his eyes were telling him. No, his mind screamed silently. She was just as her name predicted, Grace in motion. All the curves of her body flowed seamlessly into the movements of the man beneath her. Her back arched sensuously, her breasts thrust forward. Her hands rested on his thighs, her head thrown back, her throat exposed, her hair reached his thighs and swayed back and forth. Jake knew what it felt like. Even in silhouette, Jake knew the truth of what his mind was trying to deny. It was Grace, his Grace. If he'd been watching an adult movie, he would have found this erotic. But this wasn't a movie. This was his wife, and it was obscene. Jake froze for a long moment, hands pressed to his stomach, witnessing his betrayal, witnessing his death. He tore his gaze away from the horror movie playing out before his eyes and looked at his hands. Jacob raised his hands to eye level. He shook his head. For a moment, he was sure he saw blood. His hand grasped the neck of the half-full bottle willingly. She knew what he needed. Lips obeyed and obediently opened to accept and close around the moist opening. His throat protested, but his stomach welcomed the fiery water. Jacob carefully placed the open bottle on the floor, carefully moving it a short distance away, and lay back down. He rolled onto his side, assuming a fetal position. The studio floor was as good a place to sleep as any. The sound of a chainsaw running nearby echoed in Jacob's head. He groaned, both at the sound and at the realization that it was someone calling his cell phone. Why had he chosen that as his ringtone? He wanted to go back to sleep, to a beautiful, meaningless oblivion. And he certainly didn't want to talk to anyone. Not today, not ever. The sound went on and on, growing. Jacob growled and rolled onto his back, reaching for his work pants. Glancing at the screen, he saw that it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. What the hell? Where did the day go? Hello, he barked into the receiver. Jesus, Jake, how can you answer the phone like that? I could be a potential buyer, his agent said. Jacob bristled at his scolding tone. My name is Jacob, Bart. What do you need? I'm busy. Yeah, okay, whatever. I hope the fact that you're busy means you're going to tell me you're okay with your show this summer. Jacob sat down, staring at the blank canvases that stared at him warningly from the opposite wall. Yeah, fine, everything's great and everything's going according to plan. My best work ever. That's great. Let me know when I can get a photographer over to start cataloging them for the show. Yeah, sure, Jacob passed out. He looked at the bottle and contemplated returning to oblivion. Just as he reached for the bottle, the chainsaw started up again. He looked at the screen, Grace. Mentally, he considered rejecting the call, but his finger pressed the accept button. Old habits were hard to break. Jake, the soft hesitation in her voice only made Jacob angrier. It was a lie, all of it was a lie. He closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. What do you want, Grace? Yeah, shit. Jacob heard her inhale noisily. Are you okay? Are you taking care of yourself? You sound weird. You don't drink too much, do you? What the hell do you care? I care, Jake. I care. Well, I had this weird feeling that you needed me and that I should call. Jacob wasn't fooled. Her concern was an act. Hi, aren't you just the Mother Teresa of unfaithful wives, caring how the poor schmuck you screwed feels? Jake, you've got to stop verbally attacking me. You need to forget about what happened. We broke up at least a year before I met Shelby. Did we? And you didn't think to tell me about it? It's funny that you were willing to keep living off me and sharing my bed and having sex while we, how did you put it so eloquently, broke up. I just didn't know how to tell you. Well, I have to commend you for your original approach to the subject. Catching you fucking that faggot was certainly an unequivocal way of telling me what the status of our relationship was. Jake didn't know why he'd returned to the apartment. Perhaps he hoped the visions of the previous evening had been a bad dream. No such luck. She was kneeling on the bed in their Sydney apartment, face down, ass up. Her hair moved back and forth to the beat. The swaying stopped. She wiggled her ass. What do you want, Grace? What do you want, Grace? Repeated the man's voice more firmly this time. That's what I thought. Better give my slut what she wants. The man growled, slamming his hips against her raised buttocks. Jake, are you still here? Jacob shook his head, clearing his throat. Yeah, bitch, I'm still here. Please stop being rude to me. I still care about you. I'm calling because I care. Jacob ignored her plea, knowing it was an act. So how's Shelby? He's not here right now. He's away on business. You better be careful, Grace. Maybe he's on the hunt for some freshly married pussy to seduce. Maybe he's had enough of you. Or is it you? Are you bored? Do you want me to come over and fuck you? Although technically that wouldn't be cheating since we're still married and all. Jake, stop it. I know you're just trying to hurt me. I'm damn right, you bitch. You deserve all those nasty words and more. Jacob was breathing hard like he'd run the whole driveway and back. I know you. I know you still care about me, Jake. Jacob was silent. How about I come over to your place, make you a nice dinner, and we talk about the divorce? Jacob laughed loudly and cynically. What are you going to do, Grace? Poison me so you can have every last dime? Isn't that enough for you, you traitorous bitch? Ripping a man's heart out isn't enough for you? And Grace, I don't love you, I hate you. He heard her sharp sigh, and some tiny stubborn part of his soul wanted to apologize and comfort her, like when their puppy had been run over by a truck because he'd accidentally failed to close the gate, and she'd been heartbroken. But that feeling lasted only a moment, and it ended with the memory of her parting words. So cruel and sarcastic as she dragged the suitcase to the car. Ignorant weakling, I only married you because I knew you'd be famous, loser. I need a man who can actually fuck me, not one who thinks I'm Dresden fucking porcelain fool. I only wanted you to paint my famous portrait. Without another word, he hung up the phone, cutting off the echoes of the past. He shuffled into the dirty kitchen, pushing aside dirty cups and plates to make room on the bench. From the freezer, he pulled a frozen loaf of bread, and with some effort, cut off 2 slices. He stuck them in the toaster, and while he waited for them to cook, he moved to the pantry and found peanut butter. The toaster beeped, and the smell of toasted bread made his stomach rumble again in anticipation. Jacob roughly spread the pasta on the bread. There was no butter. It had run out more than 3 weeks ago. He took a bite and walked back to the door to the pantry with the toast in his hand. It was that moment when Old Mother Hubbard's pantry seemed abundant. Jacob frowned irritably. Now he would not be able to avoid a trip into town. Jacob's wreck seemed to chew its way into town and spit it out through his anus. He'd enjoyed its power before. Now he didn't. He didn't enjoy anything at all anymore. Well, anything other than alcohol-induced oblivion. He made one stop after another: post office, hardware store, supermarket. He stocked up on all the necessities. Everyone looked at him with pity. Everyone except the cashier. She was flirting. Jacob ignored them all. No sooner had he climbed into his car after running his last errand than he heard the sound of a chainsaw in his pocket. Lifting his butt off the seat and straightening his legs, Jacob was able to pull his phone out of his pants pocket. He checked the screen. It was Grace. Jacob groaned, put his head down on the steering wheel, and tapped it a few times, deciding whether or not to answer. Finally, he took the call. "What do you need, Grace?" "Hey, Jake, how are you?" "Fun fucking tastic." "Aren't you going to ask how I'm doing?" "No, I wish you would." "I miss you." Jacob shook his head. Did she really think he believed her shit? Did she really think he'd forgotten her cruel taunts? Where's the lover? He had meetings all day today. Damn, didn't little Gracie get enough attention? Doesn't a lover drop everything he's doing to fulfill your every need? Like that last asshole you got involved with? You know, the one who married you and who gave you everything? It's not fair and it's not true. Jacob remained silent, knowing she wouldn't be able to resist trying to explain and justify herself once again. You weren't there for me the last 2 years. I was there every day, Grace. I worked from home, if you remember. You may have been there physically, but mentally and emotionally you weren't there. Your head was filled with art. There was no room for me there. I was lonely. I needed someone. Now you're the one who's being unfair. About 3 years ago, I finally started getting a decent price for my paintings. Instead of selling a canvas for $25,000, I started getting $25,000 plus. And I didn't hear you complaining when that success allowed us to buy a house. Well, the one you called perfect, and an apartment in the city. No, you loved that part of my success. And for someone who was pretty damn lonely, you hid it well. I'm going to finish now, Grace moaned, rocking back and forth on her lover's instrument. God, harder, baby, harder, keep going, don't stop. Each word was another twist of the knife plunged into Jake's heart. When was the last time she'd been this slutty with him? Jake, are you still here? Did you hear a word I said? No, and what's more, I don't want to. Jacob heard her voice warning him not to hang up as he pulled the phone away from his ear and ended the call. The aroma of the lasagna he bought at the supermarket smelled pleasant to Jacob. He checked the time, wishing it would go faster so he could eat a proper lunch for the first time in a long time. 10 minutes before he left, his phone rang and the silence was broken by the sound of a chainsaw. Without looking at the screen, he realized who it was. Was she really going to ruin everything? Hey, Jake, it's me again. Yeah, I figured as much. What do you want now? I want to talk to you, baby. Jacob growled like a cornered animal. Her attempts to manipulate him were enraging him. "Don't call me baby. I'm not your damn baby. I'm Jacob, the guy you dumped. You wouldn't be so upset with me, Jake, if you didn't still love me." Grace snapped, her mask slipping. "You're just jealous because there's another man in my bed now and you wish it were still you." Outside the train window, the lush inland forests were replaced by an increasingly dense urban suburb. But Jake didn't notice it all. In fact, he avoided looking out the window because instead of the scenery, he saw only images of Grace making love, exactly love with another man. He didn't know why, and the pain of it was almost unbearable. But he felt compelled to do it anyway. He followed Grace's lead. He kept hoping that he would witness her ending her affair, that he would hear her tell her lover that she loved her husband too much to continue. This time she said she was going into town for the weekend. He decided to take the train and rent a car so as not to risk Grace recognizing his car. He parked on the opposite side of the narrow street from Shelby Holborn's mini mansion in the trendy suburb of Paddington and waited. He knew Grace would easily beat him to town. The train was much slower than her little sporty Lexus. He'd already been to their apartment in Bondi and made sure that neither she nor her car were there. Jake figured that meant she intended to stay the night at her lover's house. Jake watched Holborn's neighbors return home, walk their dogs, drive off to an unknown destination, and generally go about their business. And as he waited, he was tormented by the question of her choice of lover. Her choice was insulting in itself. The guy was a spoiled pretty boy, a playboy, inherited wealth, right out of high school, took a high position in the family firm. Everything was handed to him on a platter. What did Grace see in him? Did she honestly believe he'd change his ways for her? That he wouldn't get bored of her like all the other women he'd pursued? Jake may not have had the same level of wealth as Shelby Holborn, but his last 3 exhibitions had grossed over $750,000 each. And he was now a vibrant presence in the art world. Australia's new Brett Whiteley. On top of all that, he was a self-made man. No one handed him anything on a platter, and he wasn't petty, vain, and selfish. His patience had been rewarded, though for Jake, it was bittersweet. He'd been right. She was indeed going to stay the night at her lover's house. He was close enough to see the slit of her cocktail dress almost reach her waist as she stepped out of Holborn's sleek Ferrari. The bastard didn't even have the manners to open the door for her. He was close enough to see that the neckline of the almost dress was so deep that there was no way she was wearing a bra. Worse, he was close enough to overhear their conversation, which had obviously started back in the car. "Do you really think I can get that much if it comes to divorce?" Jake's jaw dropped in surprise. Divorce? She wanted to divorce him? He thought the decision would be left up to him. He would confront her, she would beg for forgiveness, swear she loved only him and promise to end the affair, and he would decide to forgive. It would be difficult and take time, but for her sake, he would try. He loved her enough to give her a second chance. Yeah, easily. "I checked the value of both properties. You guys bought at the right time, real estate prices have skyrocketed since then. And then, you've got dollars in the bank, his own art collection." Holborn was meaningfully silent. "Wow, I hadn't even considered his work," Holborn laughed. "They'll be worth even more when he's dead. And of course, being still married to him, you'll automatically inherit everything. But what if he doesn't kill himself before the divorce becomes final? You'll still inherit his estate unless he changes his will, and even then you can contest it." Good God, she wanted him dead. She wanted him to commit suicide. The fact that Grace had used the knowledge he had entrusted to her at the beginning of their relationship to drive him to extremes was too much. What kid wouldn't try to kill himself after being told he was the only surviving member of his family after a car accident? The last bit of Jake Morrissey was dead. "Jake, can you at least answer me?" "I'm Jacob and no, I can't answer you because I wasn't listening to you." Jacob sensed her anger and frustration. "Well, you better start listening. I'm losing my patience fast." You can't avoid me forever. I can try a good old college tryst. He smiled as the mask of her false sincerity fell again. Well, at least do it forever then. Go to the top, asshole, and spare us a divorce. Jacob laughed and hung up the phone. Jacob stood in front of his easel, the now familiar frustration bubbling up from his gut. Nothing, know it. Jacob hated Grace for depriving him of it, as much as he hated Grace for her betrayal, for her evil desires. He looked to his left, beyond the workbench, out the window at the garden of her cottage. He had often watched her as she worked in the garden. His latest work had been a semi-abstract depiction of her in various guises in the gardens surrounding their house. How could she say he wasn't there mentally and emotionally when he'd spent 12 months following her around, drawing her, photographing her, painting her in her favorite gardens? She couldn't. Her words were lies, deliberate lies designed to poison his memories, a deliberate attempt to rewrite their history by making him out to be the villain. All to justify her deception, her greed, a way to justify her infidelity, a way to drive him crazy, drive him to suicide. Jacob grinned. She could lie to herself and everyone else all she wanted. He knew the truth. The truth was that she was a malignant cancer, a cancerous growth in his life. A fantasy of destroying Grace played out in Jacob's mind. He looked at her garden, and as he looked at it, the colors seemed to become even more saturated. The blues more vibrant, the yellows more radiant, the reds deeper and juicier like blood. Even the greens became greener, like moss on a forest floor. Euphoria spilled through my veins, filling my heart, my head, my fingertips. Soon, Jacob reached for the bottle and took a sip, the firewater mixing intoxicatingly with the euphoria. Jacob checked his phone and smiled. 6 messages. He guessed who was calling. He enjoyed frustrating her attempts to talk to him. He hoped her self-control was eroding as quickly as his sanity. He decided to reward himself. After all, he'd gone to the mailbox to get the mail. Maybe he wouldn't read anything, just add a handful to the already huge collection that occupied the office desk. But the fact that he had emptied the mailbox deserved recognition. He sat at the dining room table, reclined in his chair, and drank his coffee. He added alcohol to it and dialed a number to access his messages. Hey, Jake, it's me. Please call me back, baby, I'm worried about you. Jacob snorted. Who did she think she was fooling with her sweet words? No one, certainly not him. Jacob waited for the standard voice to tell him the date and time of the second message left on his cell phone. Jake, it's me again. I know you're here. Please stop ignoring my calls. I need to talk to you. Call me back as soon as you get this message. Jacob smiled, noticing the note of irritation in her tone. Grace wasn't the most patient person, and Jacob knew better than anyone that she hated being ignored. As he waited for the third message, he took a sip of coffee. To his disappointment, it was Bart, his agent, wanting to know how the next show was coming along. Jacob frowned. He'd have to call the leech back and assuage his fears, or Bart was just as likely to show up unannounced, and that was no good. No, absolutely not. Another sip of coffee, another generic introduction about the time and date of message #4. Jake, you ignorant asshole. You better damn well call me back or you'll regret it. I'm going to make your life a misery. Jacob grinned from ear to ear. Damn, Grace looked upset. Now she was blurting out her messages. And who was it she called an ignorant asshole? At least he always opened doors for her, brought home her favorite chocolates every time he went out of town, and made her coffee every morning, which she sipped while still in bed because she didn't like mornings. Did the handsome Shelby do all that? Jacob thought not. He was probably too busy following in Grandpa and Daddy's footsteps and figuring out what to spend his next million on to bother with such trivial considerations. He certainly wasn't opening car doors for her, and he really liked calling her a whore. Jacob shrugged. Maybe she liked being treated like a cheap whore. Maybe that was where he was wrong. cherishing her and treating her with love and respect certainly didn't work. Message number 5 was a return to sugary sweetness. A fervent apology full of affection and requests to call her. It should have won her an Academy Award. When Jacob received the last message, he experienced a mental high. He selected the number on the messaging service necessary to repeat the message. He closed his eyes and leaned his head back, savoring the jubilation. This is it, Jake. My patience is at an end. I will no longer be avoided by anyone. I'm going to the house and you damn well better be there. Jacob selected the option to save the message. He refilled his coffee, added another shot, and walked into his studio. His gaze immediately went to the window. He put the phone to his ear and listened to Grace's last message. He smiled as he looked at her cottage garden. Soon he promised the flowers, soon she would be home. Jacob heard the car before he saw it. He smiled, jumping out the back door and rounding the side of the house to the side of the cottage where Grace lived. Grabbing a weapon he was sure Grace would appreciate, he found the hidden entrance to the garden. A narrow zigzag path where every turn was cleverly disguised and cautiously made his way to the grassy center where she had placed a low stone bench. She called it her secret garden, her secret place to think or read or dream. Jacob went there to hide. Behind a wall of shrubbery, Jacob marveled at how cleverly Grace had arranged the garden. A large hill rose slowly in height, and different kinds of flowers were planted in tiers. She had said at the time that it allowed her to grow more varieties, showing them off. The garden looked impenetrable. The top row of gladiolus hid the fact that there was a narrow but deep depression in the center of the mound. If Jacob had wanted to, he could have stood halfway up the side of the hollow and gone unnoticed, and Jacob was 6 feet tall. Instead, he made himself comfortable and waited. He listened for a car approaching. He recognized it as Grace's Lexus. The car stopped, he thought, right behind his car. Unexpected was the sound of 2 car doors opening and closing. Interesting. Jacob wanted to take a look to see if it was the handsome Shelby she'd brought with her. If so, he could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. He heard voices, too distant to make out the words, but distinct enough to realize that one was male and the other female. Jacob smiled. He closed his eyes so as not to be peripherally distracted, and focused on the sounds which grew louder as they approached. He should be here, Grace said. His car is here. I'll check inside. Maybe you could go around the house and see if he's anywhere outside? Sure, babe. I can't wait to see his face when he sees I'm here with you. Jacob grinned. Handsome Shelby might well see more than he expected before the day was over. Grace giggled. You're so bad, sweetie. You like bad, my little slut? Yes, I do. We are a couple made in heaven. Do you think my confronting and mocking him will be enough to piss him off? Jacob shook his head at Holborn's arrogance. He could only assume that they thought he was in his studio and couldn't hear them. I hope so. I'm so sick of pretending to care. Do you have any idea how hard it is day after day, year after year, to pretend you're a pretty butterfly when you're really an eagle? Jacob's lips curled at Grace's metaphor. She wasn't a majestic eagle. She was a hyena, a scavenger ready to pounce on a corpse. Now who's the bad guy? Grace giggled again, repeating Holborn's words. You like the bad, that's why you love me. You and I are alike. Jacob heard the front door open. The walls muffled her voice, but he could make out that she was calling his name. He imagined her going from room to room, her frustration growing when she didn't find him. Yes, Jakey Poo, Jacob heard Shelby mutter. Come out wherever you are. Shelby's snide, condescending tone didn't bother Jacob. He knew he'd have the last laugh. He listened, hearing the doors open and close, Grace calling his name. Everything was quiet for a moment, and Jacob wondered where she was. Shelby? Jacob had an answer. Jacob realized from the closeness and direction of her voice that she was standing at his workbench, calling to him through the open studio window. "Yes, baby," Shelby answered. Judging by his footsteps, he was approaching from the back of the house. "Did you find him?" "No, I haven't checked that shed in the backyard yet." "It's a pottery shed." There was a pause, and Jacob imagined Shelby's questioning look. The previous owner had been a professional potter. There are 2 state-of-the-art kilns and an electric potter's wheel. He passed away and we bought the place from his daughter. I take it he's not in the house? No, and you should see the place. It looks like it was hit by a bomb. I don't think he's done the dishes or changed the linens since I left. There are empty bottles everywhere. The trash can is overflowing and it stinks to high heaven. From the looks of it, he's given up a lot. This might be even easier than we thought. Jacob noticed that Grace was speaking quite calmly. There was no worry in her voice. You'd think she was discussing the weather, not her husband's suicide. Do you think he's already killed himself? I don't know, maybe, Grace said thoughtfully. He's certainly been talking differently lately, and it's not like him to ignore my calls. Maybe I should check out the pottery barn. Yes, you can, and I dare you to take another look around the house. He's probably hiding in a closet or under a bed or somewhere equally stupid. All right, I'll meet you back here in 5. Jacob's pulse quickened. His ears were ringing. The time was almost up. He took slow, deep breaths to calm himself. Jacob slipped the weapon into the back pocket of his work pants and moved back down the narrow path as quietly as he could, stopping in front of the entrance and crouching. He flinched when the weapon rested against him and shifted his position slightly to relieve the pressure. He counted down the minutes, anticipating the impatience that would overwhelm him. The muscles in his thighs protested the forced immobility, but he ignored the discomfort. He waited until Shelby was half a meter from his hiding place. Hey, lover boy, you looking for me? Jacob asked nonchalantly, getting up and walking out of the garden. Shelby turned around, clearly surprised. He reflexively took a step back. What the hell, where? Shelby fell silent. He shook his head, squared his shoulders, recovered, and took a step forward. Well, look at you, Jakey boy. Aren't you a sight to behold? Anyone would think you'd lost your wife. Jacob tilted his head to the side as if perplexed. Wow, I didn't realize you were not only a clown, but also a corporate custodian. That must look good on your resume. Careful, Jakey boy, you're forgetting who's in charge. I'll give you a hint, it's not you. I already have your wife, and by the way, isn't she sweet? That's a lot of woman for you. A woman like Grace needs a firm hand, not the love crap you've showered her with. Shelby Holborn grinned evilly. And Jakey boy, I have to say that after my little trip around your hacienda, I've decided that I really like the idea of a country house. Yes, I think I'll take it too. Jacob smiled. It was more of a thinning of the lips, a baring of the teeth. He stepped forward, shortening the distance between them, and cupped his hand around the weapon in his back pocket. Holborn raised his hands, clenched them into fists, ready to fight. He was too slow. Jacob had entered Shelby's personal space, making it impossible for Holborn to identify Jacob's weapon without breaking eye contact. And Jacob was sure he wouldn't. Too bad, Jacob thought. I wish I could see the realization of his imminent death in his eyes. Well, you can't have everything. Jacob stabbed the garden fork, its tines carefully sharpened into the soft flesh of Shelby's belly. And she was soft. The boy should have spent more time doing belly exercises. With one hand, Jacob angled the fork upward, pressing hard, aiming to pierce Shelby Holborn's heart. Apparently, the way to the man's heart was indeed through the stomach. He would have preferred to rip out his heart. It would be more symmetrical that way. But piercings would have to do. With his other hand, he covered his mouth, muffling his screams. He stared intently into Holborn's eyes, enjoying the expression of shocked horror. Holborn's hands clutched at Jacob's arms as if trying to hold him down. Jacob brought his face so close to Holborn's that their noses were almost touching. He gave him a deliberately mad look. "Get the fork, Holborn." Jacob laughed happily at the play on words. And he was sure that even Martin Riggs, Mel Gibson's character in Lethal Weapon, would have been pleased at his cleverness. "Shelby? Jake?" Grace's voice distracted Jacob from his joke for a moment. He looked over Holborn's shoulder and smiled at his wayward wife. "Hello, Grace. How nice of you to drop in on your lover." When Grace took a step forward with a confused look, Jacob gave one last push. Holborn's last exhale washed over his face. Jacob wrinkled his nose. Ugh, this guy had eaten garlic recently. Jacob felt pressure on his wrist as Holborn's knees buckled. He pulled out a garden fork, and Holborn collapsed at his feet like a puppet with its strings cut. Grace shifted her gaze from her lover to Jacob's hand. "My God, Jake, what have you done?" "I thought it was obvious," Jacob replied, grinning. "I picked up my lover's fork. I wanted to see what all the fuss was about, so I stabbed him." "You're right. It's fun. It's a little dirty, but yeah, it's fun." My God, Grace repeated over and over, backing away from him. Jacob stepped around Holborn's motionless body. Grace took another step back. Jacob took another step forward. The faster Grace retreated, the faster Jacob moved forward. Grace shook her head. Jacob nodded his head. Then she turned and ran. Jacob darted in pursuit. Adrenaline pulsed in his veins, and he realized what it was to be a lion chasing a gazelle. It was intoxicating. He closed the gap, adjusting his grip on the garden fork. Sprinting at full speed, he boomeranged the fork at Grace's legs and grinned as she fell face first onto the lawn a meter away from the car. In a moment, Jacob was on top of her, flipping her over onto her back and riding her, pinning her arms to her sides with his hips. He squeezed her tightly, risking a sideways lean to reach for a garden fork. "Loverboy said you like it rough, that you need a firm hand." "Well, how do you like it, Grace?" "Jake, don't, please don't," she whimpered, clearly frightened. "I'm not Jake, I'm Jacob." "What, Jake?" "Please don't hurt me, you love me, I know you love me." "Read my lips, bitch. My name is Jacob, I'm not Jake." "Jake loved you, I didn't." "God, he loved you so much, he was the only person who cared about you. You were his reason to breathe, and how did you repay his loyalty? You fucked him, you killed him." Grace sobbed, rolling her head from side to side. "Jake, you're not making any sense, please listen to me. You're not this Jacob, you're Jake Morrissey. You're my husband and you love me, just like I love you, just like I've always loved you. I came here today to apologize to you." Jacob laughed, "Nice try, bitch. That's why you brought your lover." Was he going to apologize too? "Yeah, you love Jake, of course I did. That's why you spent months trying to throw him off balance. You tried to kill the guy who gave you everything. But even then, you and your lover didn't have the guts to do it on your own. You wanted Jake to do it for you, the guy who gave you the perfect house with the perfect garden. Tried to be the perfect husband and give you the perfect life. And what did you give him?" "You're Jake, you love me," she sobbed. "No, I don't." When Jake looked into your eyes, do you know what he thought he saw? An angel, a sweet and perfect angel. You're Jake, not Jacob. Grace wriggled and twitched, trying to get free. But Jacob sat on her like a rodeo cowboy, and his weight was too much for her to throw off. "Do you want to know what I see when I look into your eyes?" Grace whimpered, tearfully repeating her earlier words. "You're Jake, Jake Morrissey, and Jake is gentle and kind. Jake loves me, you are not Jacob. I see a cancerous tumor." "What do we do with malignant tumors?" Like a broken record, Grace sobbed. "You're Jake, Jake Morrissey, and you love me. We cut them out, that's what we do. With those words, Jacob pierced the cancer's lying eyes. Jacob whistled as he mixed Holborn's ashes with the fertilizer of blood and bones. The daffodils would be thrilled with the upcoming fertilizer, just as the cottage garden had fallen in love with Grace. The thought of Grace in the garden reminded Jacob that he needed to move the sprinkler. Mentally, he ticked off the to-do list. Delete Grace's phone messages, check. Drive the Lexus to Sydney disguised as Grace, check. Sneak into Sydney apartment and leave signed divorce papers, check. Dispose of Grace and Holborn's cell phones along with the disguise, check. Using the second disguise to get on the train, check. Disposing of the second disguise, check. Vacuum the inside of the stoves, check. Wash the inside of stoves with bleach, check. Clean the chimneys of the stoves, check. Make dishes for kiln firing and use in artwork, check. Scatter grass seed around killing areas, fertilize and water, check. Clean the house from top to bottom, check. Shower, shave, and cut hair, check. Show up to town again looking normal and healthy, check. 3 weeks passed before the police approached him with questions about the disappearance of his wife and Shelby Holborn. Jacob couldn't do anything to help them except confirm their affair. A week later, they returned with a search warrant. They even took small samples from the finished canvases to see if Jacob had put blood in the paint. Obviously, they didn't know anything about paints. Blood would eventually spoil and ruin the colors. So despite their best efforts, they found nothing. The case remained open. Bart was thrilled with the paintings for Jacob's next show and said they were his best work. He lyrically commented on Jacob's vibrant color scheme and use of ceramic shards, giving the canvases an almost three-dimensional look. He told Jacob that he would use words like kaleidoscope and quasi-mosaic in the exhibition's flyer. He didn't say it in so many words, but he let Jacob know that his recent notoriety wouldn't hurt his sales. He even predicted that sales at the expo would exceed the $1 million mark. Jacob, on the other hand, was just happy to have it back. And the daffodils really liked the Holborn